Hi, this is Victoria Alexander. I'm your candidate for Congress in District 19 of New York. And last week I got a letter, a handwritten letter from a constituent, and his name is Richard, and he's in Schoharie County, New York. And I'm going to be answering Richard's questions in these videos because he took the time to write the letter. I've gotten several email messages, but somehow getting a written letter makes this one special. And he asks the kinds of questions that I think everybody is asking. So today, the first question Richard asks, we are in a crisis right now with this COVID virus. There's been talk that if there's a vaccine, that it should be made mandatory. Do you support this? And if so, for whom? Well, Richard, a lot of people are asking that question. So I did some research for you on mandatory vaccinations, and this is what I think. So the mandatory vaccination is a state issue, actually, but should it come up at the federal level, I think we need to start talking about it. In 1905, the Supreme Court upheld mandatory vaccination in the Jacobson versus Massachusetts decision. Jacobson refused the smallpox vaccination because he claimed that he had had a very bad reaction to smallpox vaccination as a child. He was probably already immune, I don't know, maybe he didn't need it anyway. But he was fined $5 at the time, which is about $150 in today's money. The Supreme Court decided that the state, Massachusetts, can restrict rights, can require a vaccination, even if it could potentially harm someone, if the Board of Health deems it necessary for the greater good. So that was the decision. And it's been upheld a number of times. There are two issues here that I want to talk about. First of all, the idea of potential to do harm versus actually doing harm. I think that's important, and we shouldn't overlook that. If Jacobson, let's say, had contracted the disease at some point in his life after he refused to get the vaccination, then he might have spread it to another person. Maybe someone else who got the vaccination but it didn't take, because vaccinations aren't always effective. Sometimes they don't work. And that's the reason why they want as many people as possible to get vaccinated so that you have greater immunity in the population. So let's say Jacobson didn't get the vaccination and he got the disease and he spread it to someone who had gotten the vaccination. It just didn't take. In this case, by not protecting himself, he caused harm to someone else. Then perhaps he could be held accountable, maybe sued for damages or charged with a crime. But in that case, he would be charged with a crime for having done actual harm. We could probably lock up potential criminals all day long. And I don't know if that's the way we want to go with things. The second issue I want to talk about here is the idea of a greater good. Greater good logic frequently fails the logic test. For example, it's been used to justify the draft. Supposedly, the government has a right to put you or your child in harm's way because the war effort is for the greater good. Well, sometimes it's not. Allowing a small group of individuals to determine what is the greater good is a very dangerous thing. Likewise, allowing a small group of people to determine what is necessary for public health is very dangerous. Any small group of people may have a profit motive or another agenda, or they could be wrong. My motto is decentralized power. So, of course, the idea that you would put so much power in a small group of people, I'm not going to go along with that at all. I believe individual health decisions should be made only by medical professionals together with their patients. Medical exemptions to any medical procedure should be respected by the legal system. Bureaucracy should not trump science, ever. Because remember, science is a community activity that is ongoing and ever-changing and adapting and improving. It cannot be codified into law. It cannot. Another issue is how public health risk is defined. Maybe assign a number. In the case of smallpox, it had a 30% fatality rate. Compare that to COVID, which is currently at 0.1 to 0.2% fatality rate. I also want to note that the same Supreme Court that decided this case of mandatory vaccination is better known for Plessy versus Ferguson, which upheld racial segregation laws. Homer Plessy was the original Rosa Parks, except that he lost that case, and separate but equal laws remained in effect for decades because of these unreasonable and capricious judges. The mandatory vaccination decision made by this court needs its Rosa Parks. It's been challenged several times, but it needs to be challenged again. And I want to say a little something about the money side of vaccinations. Government funds a lot of the foundational research that goes into discovering many different kinds of drugs and medical therapies. Billions of our tax dollars are spent on that. And if I can compare the process to, let's say, the Wright brothers who invented flight. First, they had to discover the foundational knowledge of aerodynamics. Once they had discovered the basic laws of aerodynamics, designing the wing was the easier part. They set up wind tunnels, they did all that research. That was very difficult research. Well, right now, what's going on with the funding for a lot of the research with vaccines is the government is paying for that wind tunnel research. That's the difficult part. That's understanding the actual mechanisms that are going on in the body with regard to how the body reacts to, develops antibodies. And so if the taxpayers are paying for a lot of that research, they could just continue on and do the final steps and discover the molecular structures that would work as vaccines and make that available to the public without a patent. Right now, patents are issued after taxpayers have funded so much of the foundational research. And then on top of that, to make matters even worse, the government then purchases the vaccines or other drugs for quite a bit of money. And the U.S. government has made advanced purchases of COVID vaccines that haven't even been developed or tested yet, paid in advance. And then on top of that, there's also, and this applies to me as a possible U.S. representative at the national level, there is an act called the National Childhood Vaccine Act of 1986, and that removed liability from vaccine manufacturers for their product. Billions of tax dollars are paid out for vaccine injuries every year. So not only do the taxpayers fund a lot of research, buy the vaccines, but we also pay for the lawsuits. So taxpayers fund a lot of research, buy the vaccines, we pay the lawsuits for these manufacturers. I think it's time that we reconsider the practice of granting patent rights for vaccines. Governments can pay for the research and make the discoveries public. I'd rather see multiple pharmaceutical companies compete to bring the highest quality product to the market, offering choices so that parents and the public can decide with the help of the family doctor which is the safest. So Richard, thank you for your question. And next week I'll try to answer another one of your questions, but thank you very much.